good evening to you all. Welcome to the Hellenic Center. I'm Iwona Blazwick, I'm the director of the Hellenic Center, and it's just a great pleasure to see you all here tonight. We are hosting the 4th edition of the series Echo, presenting tonight the work of leading contemporary artist Glenn Brown, another Marylebonian, let's say, and of course in conversation with curator and art critic Iwona Blazwick, who not only brings her curatorial brilliance to this project, but she's also the mastermind of Echo series, this early aging series of talks at the Hellenic Center. So Echo, for the ones of you who don't know about it, focuses on the theme of contemporary art and the ancient world, and looks into how artists engage with the legacy of, let's say, the enduring legacy of antiquity in many different ways. I'll now present our speakers in a little more detail. So Glenn Brown is known for his very distinctive, of course, paintings that rework and transform references from art history, using reproductions of works by other artists, and his work has been the subject of many major solo shows internationally, including at the Serpentine Gallery, the Kunsthistorisches Museum, Tate Liverpool, the Frans Hals Museum, the Fondation Vincent van Gogh Arles, the Rembrandt House Museum, the British Museum, and most recently the Freud Museum in 2025. Upcoming exhibitions include presentations at the Holborn Museum and Gainsborough House this year. I hope, did anyone of these take place already?
The Holborn Museum and number 1 Royal Crescent in Bath is just opened.
Just opened, wonderful. So, Iwona Blazwick is a distinguished curator and art critic and lecturer. She's currently curator of the Royal Commission of Alula's Public Art Expert Panel and was director of the Whitechapel Gallery from 2001 till 2022, where she spearheaded a major expansion of the organization's building and program, generating new audiences and curatorial strand for Whitechapel Gallery. In 2008, she was awarded an OB for services to art. I would like to thank everyone who made tonight possible, and I can start from Edgar Languina. Can't see, you're right there, okay, director of the Brown Collection, and the rest of the team at Glenn Brown's studio. Of course, the whole team at Gagosian for supporting us and also offering the reception after the talk, which will take place on the same floor at the bar where you first came. Of course, last but not least, my biggest thanks go to Glenn Brown for accepting our invitation, and to Iwona Blazwick for moderating this talk. So thank you both very much. Now, after the talk, there will be time for questions, and my colleague will run around with a microphone, so please use it, as the talk is recorded, actually. And then the final point is, if you hear the fire alarm, you can come out of the door to my right and right again out of the building. Please put your phones on silent so they won't ring during the talk. And finally, just join me in a very warm round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much.
Now, Glenn Brown has described his work as a dialogue with the artists of the past. So, this evening, we're going to explore a dialogue in his work which goes all the way back to the artistic legacies of ancient Greece. Now, the Renaissance is a term coined by Giorgio Vasari, the first art historian, to describe how the perfection of Greek classicism is reborn in the work of 15th and 16th century Italian painters and sculptors. And that golden thread then continued through the Baroque and Mannerist art of both Southern and Northern Europe, which has a special relevance for Glenn Brown. We're going to explore how this classical ideal reappears in his work and what happens to it there. Also, the stories from Greek mythology that give us an insight into his subject matter and methodology. And finally, how the myths, which Freud used to create a vocabulary of the unconscious might be mirrored in his paintings, drawings and sculptures. Now, it was the human figure that encapsulated the classical Greek ideal. So we're going to start our journey with this 2017 painting of Aphrodite, goddess of beauty, love, passion and procreation, known as Venus to the Romans. She has travelled through art history, from Botticelli to Titian, Rubens, Velázquez, Watteau and Poussin, and now she finds herself in the 21st century on the way to the leisure centre. So, Glenn, can you share with us what inspired you to take up this long history of depictions of Aphrodite, stroke Venus?
Well, in this case, the starting point was a painting by Pierre Tableras, which I saw in Rome, and I don't always necessarily see the original painting that I'm basing my work on, but in this case, the starting point was actually me seeing the painting and then finding a decent reproduction of it and then playing around with it and distorting the figure. The important thing to me was to distort the figure and, as you said, to take a classical portrait by Tableras and manipulate her, enlarging her buttocks, making her shoulders and arms smaller, and making her feet smaller in a way that artists like Henrik Holtius and Abraham Bloemaert, Dutch artists or Flemish artists, I should say, would have done to turn her into a mannerist painting. So she becomes superhuman, she becomes super childbearing, super sexy and very in green and part of nature, because I want her to be extraordinarily beautiful, and to me being green somehow comes, being part of nature that is extraordinarily beautiful.
Because she's usually this peachy, white, pearly colour, so this shade of emerald green with, you've got kind of olive highlights, and then it's made even more intense with the red outline around the buttock and where she touches the couch. So you've made it very, very vivid.
Yes, the red highlight around the outside is a little trick that I've taken from Eugene Delacroix. His studio was painted red, and he would use the reflection off the walls to highlight his figures. So even if the figure could be relatively conventionally coloured, you'd have these bright red highlights around, and it just works very entertainingly when you can use it, especially when it contrasts with a colour like green, which is obviously the opposite to red on the colour spectrum. And I love contrasting colours like that. So the colour spectrum and colour theory is very important to me, to heighten your expectations of what you're looking at, heighten your emotions.
And can you tell us something about your kind of approach to beauty as an ideal? Because as you say, you distort it.
All beauty is distorted. The idea of classical perfection, I mean, which is the Greek and Roman idea of classical perfection, never really existed. I mean, you look at any sculpture and Greek sculpture, and they vary. The heads can be made larger or smaller, and the feet often are not the size you'd expect them to be, depending on the sex of the figure. Genitals are generally made very small because it looks sexier that way in a sculpture, and that mannerism has always been there. It just sort of burst out at a certain point in Northern Europe when artists felt, I suppose, slightly freed of Catholicism slightly. They weren't making work for the church for the first time, and I think that sort of freed them to be far more playful, sexy, humorous, because humour is a large part of both my work and a lot of mannerist artists' work as well.
And she's on a very prosaic journey to the leisure centre. Can you say something about why?
It's a section from a book by Lavinia Greenlaw. It's called The Importance of Music for Girls. And she writes about her childhood in Essex. And it struck me that sort of the leisure centre was a sort of the modern way of thinking about leisure time and athleticism. And it's actually quite a sort of Greek notion, sort of, you know, the idea of sports and games and the gymnasium is the modern leisure centre. It's where we go to show our bodies off or exercise to make our bodies more beautiful. But also the centre of leisure seems quite a sexy word as well. But it's on the way there, it's moving, it's going somewhere. So I like that sense of animation, that they're not quite there, they're going there, they're heading off, having a cigarette maybe before in the case of Lavinia's book, they're sort of having a naughty cigarette before they head off towards the leisure centre. And I like that sort of odd juxtaposition.
And this is perhaps her male equivalent, Apollo. And the title of this work, as you see, When the Satellite Sings. This has got something very characteristic about your work, which is the mark making, where your brushwork is almost like a form of calligraphy. Could you tell us something about your methodology?
I perhaps shouldn't always mention the painting the thing that this is based on, but I suppose in this case I will. It's in the Taylor's Museum, which is a beautiful museum in Haarlem, just outside Amsterdam. They have a fantastic collection of drawings, particularly. They have paintings and other things, and scientific instruments, but their drawing collection is extraordinary. And there's a number of 16th century Italian drawings, which they don't know who they're by, and this is based on one of them. It's a very simple drawing, the starting point for this. It's very unfilled in, it's almost an outline drawing. So a lot of what you see is me inventing, playing around, and the starting point is just a line drawing. It has no tone in it, it is just line, but I apply line upon line upon line. Almost before the talk started, you saw detail of a painting that had lots of lines in it, and that's almost the starting point for a painting like this. It's a line drawing where I just carry on applying the lines to create form, and then on top of what I call the skeleton of the line drawing, I start to apply flesh. The flesh is the oil paint. It's the glazing. It's the softness, it's the gooiness that sticks on it. It's the muscle as well that you apply and fill in, and it creates depth. And then only once I've created the entire painting in monochrome, so first drawing, then a monochrome painting, and then only once I'm happy with this monochrome painting that I feel like it has body, literally, and form, do I then apply colour over the top, which is then applied in glazes over the top, and the colours can become more and more intense as it builds up, and then I can knock things back and alter things.
I mean, for those of you who may not have seen a Glen Brown painting in the flesh, you may think that this is a very thick, chewy kind of surface, but actually it's not. It's very, very smooth and fine.
Yes, all the paintings that you see tonight, the surface is absolutely flat. It's like pages of a magazine or a photograph. And I love that sense of oddness, the trompe-l'oeil play of what am I looking at? Is it a gestural painting, or is it a very finely detailed photorealist painting? Or it's troublesome. My paintings are meant to be troublesome to look at. I mean, the subject matter can be rather troublesome in all the holes and orifices and the grotesque elements within the paintings. The colour is quite grotesque and awful and tries to repel you to a degree. But I love that sense of push and pull that a painting can have. It can push you away, and then the holes within the figure draw you in as you want to enter into them and pierce them.
And there's something about this kind of incredible image of masculinity, that pure hunk of muscle, and somehow there's a caress about these lines as well, as if you're feeling his body and our eyes are feeling him as well. It's an incredibly kind of erotic, sensual image, I think.
Oh, that sense of your eyes moving across the surface is very important. It's all about composition and getting your eye to bounce around the surface of the painting and therefore bounce around the surface of the figure. And a good painting should have a really nice, strong sense of composition. It should move you around the painting so your eye doesn't quite want to stop anywhere. But it will bounce because our eyes don't slowly move; they move in jerks around. And I'm trying to, with the dots and the lines, I'm trying to pull your eye around the surface of it. And yes, as it moves around, you unfold the figure.
And the title?
I've always been rather obsessed with satellites for some reason. That idea of seeing a satellite as being it's an object which is created by mankind. It almost becomes like a child that we've created, and then we abandon it. We push it out in space, and we ask it to do works. And it works for us as it surrounds us, as it rotates around the Earth. But it's abandoned in this atmosphere. Well, a place without atmosphere. And I love that sense of abandonment, of getting a rocket and sending something out. So we no longer want it, we reject it, but we demand attention from it as well, and it passes information to and from us. Satellites seem fascinating objects to me, and so the idea of a singing satellite becomes like something that wants to communicate to us, but we don't quite know what it's communicating. It's like a figure on the edges of the rocks, sort of far in the distance, singing to us, saying, come to me, come to me. But if we go and visit the satellite, we die because we leave the Earth's atmosphere. So it's.
And I suppose it joins the firmament, doesn't it? It becomes like a shooting star.
Well, they become gods, yes.
And so there's thousands of them apparently circulating the project over the Earth, like a lot of our rubbish, but at the same time, from our point of view, they become like celestial bodies.
Oh, they do at night. They happen to be moving more quickly than the stars or planets. But yes, they become part of the firmament. So yes, they become part of the God's world, I think, from our perspective.
The kind of duality in your work, the vitality that it just won't stand still, I think also relates to this figure of Hermaphroditus. He was a beautiful young man with whom a nymph fell in love, and when he rejected her, she prayed to the gods that they would never be parted and that they were fused into one body. And often in antiquity, the figure has female breasts and male genitalia. But here, there's this kind of incredible dynamic around this figure which seems to be fusing the two together. Can you say something about the origin? Are these two figures from two different sources, or what's the genesis of this painting?
They're from two different, completely separate sources, and one's a 19th century drawing, the other one's a late 17th century drawing. So I've superimposed them. That sounds like a basic way of putting it, but it's the initial starting point. You manipulate, play around, enlarge elements and get them to fit together in a deliberately awkward way. And then, again, similarly, it's a line drawing and then a monochrome painting, and then I apply colour over the top. Trying to get the figures to both blend with each other and harmonise, and to fight with each other at the same time. So they become one at certain points. I mean, there is one torso, there are 3 legs in it, and you're not quite sure whose legs and whose arms are which. So there's one front, but there is fundamentally one body to them. So it's not like a transparency painting in the way that the Cavia might make it, where you notice that one figure is separate. They do become very conjoined. as it were. They share a blood supply, I think.
And it does seem very apposite at a time when there's a lot of discussion about gender fluidity, about the possibility of encompassing all aspects of both genders in one identity. Did that inform you at all, or is that something that we can read into it now?
A lot. I mean, you've shown two paintings of very male and very female figures, but a lot of the paintings and portraits I make, the gender is very fluid in them. You don't often know which sex they are, which I like very much. It makes the figure engaging. You keep wanting to look at it. You keep wanting to take it apart and understand what you're looking at. You're both slightly repelled by it, but fascinated by it all the same. It's different, but it's also very much you. So that idea of the fluid gender I'm almost saying that it's a more entertaining way of thinking about the human body.
And the title here, I looked this up. It's German. It means in the rock. What's the relation with the image?
It comes from a piece of music by Gregor Ligeti, and I love Ligeti's music. It's atonal and awkward and clashing, but extremely beautiful, I think. I've often said that people who don't understand Ligeti's music, when they're listening to it, if they think of Tom and Jerry, and think of it just listening to Ligeti in atonal music whilst watching a Tom and Jerry film, the whole thing makes sense. It's the way, and then you walk along the street and you can go clash bang, and that's actually the way the world is. And you think, oh, this is what music should be like. It doesn't have to be rhythmical. That's boring. Let's have something like Ligeti, which is, again, like my music. It sort of has awkward moments. Sorry, like my painting, it has awkward moments. It has bits of beautiful tonality in it, and then it goes off into atonal juxtapositions and a fight between different elements. It seems a nice analogy for the way you look at the painting.
One of the ways that classical statuary found its way through the centuries was through the bust, because the bust or the fragment of the statue or plaster cast of the statue was something that artists could keep in their studios. They started to make their appearance in schools of art. They were a feature, actually, as we were discussing, of the art school, really up until the mid or late 20th century. And they would be a feature of the Wunderkammer as well. So the bust or the portrait is something which also is a key feature of your work, something that you return to. And looking at this extraordinary drawing after an artist called Goltzius, I was reminded of the figure of Medusa, a figure in Greek mythology known for her severed head. But tell us something about Goltzius.
He's a Flemish artist, and Henrik Holtius, or Holtius, if you're pronouncing it properly. He was a 16th century artist, mainly known for his prints, but painting as well. And he would work in conjunction with lots of other artists as well. So sculptors like Adrien de Vries, he would work in collaboration with, and printmakers as well. And there were lots of borrowing going on. It was a very competitive time. Artists were competing with each other, who could be the strangest in many ways, and who could make the most beautiful, extraordinary prints possible. And I think Holtius was one of the artists who, some of his prints are the most beautiful objects ever made. I have a Pieta by him, very small print, in my studio, and you need a magnifying glass to look at it properly. And it's one of the most beautiful objects that you'll ever see. The line in it and the way he uses the continuous line to create flesh is extraordinary. And I can't compete with the technical abilities of an artist like Holtius and the technicians he was working with to make the prints. I have a much more free-ranging, playful way of thinking about line and the way the lines build up and work on each other. So Holtius's lines in my drawings become much more free-ranging and abstract and have a greater sense of movement in them.
Yeah, and like Medusa's hair, which was, of course, snakes, the lines have a life of their own. I mean, they're almost like moving as you look at this image.
Yeah, I mean, though it's based on a Holtius, it's been extraordinarily changed from the original. And yes, the hair is being built up. And I like drawing hair. I've drawn quite a lot of hair in my paintings because of the sense of movement it creates and the sense of line and brushstroke that each individual hair. I mean, it's also analogous with the thing that I use to paint with, which is obviously a stick with hairs stuck on the end of it. Which is a fantastic piece of technology. When somebody first realised that you could stick animal hairs on the end of a stick and create a paintbrush, it must have changed the world. And so all these lines are painted with very fine paintbrushes in Indian ink mostly, and just this sort of sense of fluidity and playfulness that you can create just with a line, I find endlessly entertaining.
Another aspect of the bust which you also return to is the Janus head. It's actually a Roman god form who was the god of doorways and beginnings and endings. And here we see a fusion again of two different sources. Looks like male and female. What's the origin of this painting?
It's a Raphael painting of a man and a painting of a woman by Guido Reni. So both Italian artists, but very different generations. Well, not very different, but based on a drawing which again has been very much fleshed out. This painting took a very long time to make because it's a large painting. And I sometimes start on the process of making a painting and I don't quite know I certainly don't know where it's going to end. And I had no idea how many years this painting was going to take to make. And I showed it and I still wasn't happy with it. And I got it back to the studio and I repainted it and I showed it again and I still wasn't happy with it and got it back in the studio. And so it's gone through a number of stages. It's been a battle. But a lot of my paintings are a battle, which is a nice analogy with, again, what's going on between the male and female figures that are in the painting. Where one begins and the other one starts, you're never quite sure. And whose eye is which, and whose nose and mouth is which, and what orifice, there's strange orifices that appear in particular parts where they shouldn't quite be. Again, sort of forms a sort of strange sense of ownership.
And again, the lines in the painting, the hair, has this animal-like quality. I mean, it could also be a horror show. I mean, it could be worms coming out of the skull of a rotting cadaver. I mean, there is a kind of sense of corruption or decay implicit in this as well.
Well, I mean, giving something a yellow or green face, that sense of decay is always going to be there. Decay is one of the most wonderful things that exist in the world because without decay, we couldn't survive. There wouldn't be soil that plants can grow in. Bacteria, in our guts, involves the breaking down of food that couldn't exist without that idea of decay either. And the most wonderful thing about decay is at the end of our lives, we are, some of us anyway, are buried and decay and starts to turn into other objects, whether it's earthworms, trees, plants. We metamorphosize from one thing to another because of decay. So I'm sort of trying to honour that sense of decay in the world and saying how beautiful it is. There's nothing more beautiful, in a sense, than a rotting object.
There's also a slightly Brexit-like quality to the title, which is Doggerland. And I discovered this was actually a prehistoric mass that connected us with Europe.
about 15,000 years, as the ice sheets that covered Europe melted, the sea level rose, and England became an island for the first time, and Doggerland, which was the area of land between East Anglia and Holland, Belgium, disappeared into the sea. I love this idea of this place that no longer exists, but there's a memory of, there's a sort of almost folklore sense of place of it. It could exist. It's a dream world in many ways. And I was brought up in East Anglia, in Norfolk, and Norfolk, as we all know, is very flat. And so that idea, and if you go around the edges of large parts of Norfolk, it's either very marshy, or it's literally disappearing into the sea as the cliffs are eroded and the soil is taken into the sea and moved to other different parts. So I come from a place which is ephemeral, as it were. It's temporal. It's not always going to be there, just as we're not always going to be here. And again, it's a celebration of the non-permanent nature of our lives.
One of the key aspects of the lives of the gods and of the mortals in Greek mythology is the notion of metamorphosis, where human bodies get transformed into plants or animals, often at times of great stress. So they may be being pursued or ravished, or they want to ravish. And it's that point when the human becomes often vegetable or animal, such as Daphne, who escapes the advances of Apollo by turning into a tree. This is one of a series of works where you perform this act of metamorphosis. And here, very importantly, the origin of this plant is the tree itself, the roots. But the roots seem to be in an ocean, and then the tree transforms into this huge human face. It's also very monochromatic, so tell us about the genesis of this work.
Well, maybe I should start with talking about, when I think of Daphne, I think of Bernini's sculpture of Daphne and Apollo. And seeing that for the first time, and seeing Daphne with this look of horror on her face as she starts to turn into a tree, is just one of the most extraordinary things, because again you're looking at marble, but the marble is plant, but the plant is also human, and it's that sort of, what on earth am I looking at here? Am I looking at marble, flesh, wood? And it's that sense in which I want to create, that that you don't know what you're looking at. Am I looking at a painting here, or am I looking at human beings? Am I looking at a tree? Where on earth is it? Is it in a dream world? Why does it look like it's under the water when it's actually, a tree? So I'm trying to be disconcerting. I'm trying to create this dream world. You don't see an awful lot of the details in this painting, because it has a lot of very, very fine lines on it. Again, it's sort of the length of time it takes me to make a painting is very important, because as a viewer, you're aware that the amount of time I must have sat in the studio and painted these tiny little brushstrokes and concentrated on these tiny little leaves and rivulets and bits of bark that I've painted. I've spent an awful long time doing it. It's almost an act of homage to the object, because whilst I'm painting, I'm not doing anything else, obviously. And so I'm almost monk-like, sat in my studio, giving my life to representing this peculiar world. And I think as a viewer, I want you to read that.
And there's a somber quality, I think, to the palette. These whites and greys, blacks and blue. It almost feels apocalyptic. Is there an environmental message in this?
Oh, very much so. I mean, a lot of my work has a very strong environmental message. When I'm painting trees, I want you to be very respectful of the tree. In some sense, you should be just as respectful, if not more respectful of the tree, which often has lived far longer than any human has lived. We have trees in our garden in the house in Suffolk which are 500-600 years old, and and some of them are coming near the ends of their lives now, and they have very few little leaves on the end of them, and they are so beautiful and so grotesque and so ugly in places and so fascinating, and insects and birds, the wind, the rain has torn at them, it's distorted them, and it's the fact that they've battled through 600 years against all these things which are trying to attack them and still survived. Which, how can you not have respect of an object, a thing, a living thing which is battled so hard to be to exist? And it's that sense that I want you to respect nature as you look at them. And they become an act of homage to the tree.
Here, the relation between base and top is reversed. So the base is the human figure, a statue, and the top is the foliage. But what we're also seeing here is the metamorphosis of sculpture into painting. Into paint, actually. So tell us about this work and how this evolved.
Well, again, going back to that Bernini sense of the great problem of looking at Bernini and understanding what you're looking at, I wanted this work to be confusing. Are you looking at marble or are you looking at oil paint? Because fundamentally I take an existing sculpture, a 19th century Italian sculpture in this case, which is which, as you can see, has a tree behind it, and I've extended the tree, so the tree comes up, made of oil paint, and wraps around her, envelops her, smothers her. Whether it's making love to her or killing her, you're not quite sure. I should point out that the oil paint is just applied with a brush, so it's fundamentally a painting. I slowly build the paint up. I apply the oil paint, and it has to dry, and then you apply more oil paint. So over the period of sometimes 2 or 3 years, you end up with a painting which is becomes a sculpture if you let the paint build up that thickly.
Yeah, absolutely amazing work. You've just opened a show in Bath at the Holborn Museum and the No. 1 Royal Crescent, which is a house museum. And that takes us into a different thematic, which is storytelling. And the exhibition is called Arrows of Desire. And here you've perhaps moved from just offering a portal or a window onto a world through your paintings to creating a whole maritime environment. And the characters here are based on Poseidon, the god of the sea, and Salacia, who was in fact his Roman, his wife in the Roman iteration. But it's this idea of the Lord or the spirit of the ocean and the deeps, and of also the god of storms and violence at sea and earthquakes, whereas the female counterpart is the goddess of sunlight and water, apparently, and of the brilliance of the stream or the music of the river. And you brought them together, but in this context, in this beautiful installation, where you've also designed a seaweed-inspired wallpaper. Tell us about the process behind this, and also the title, Grotesque installation.
The starting point for the 3 works here are drawings by Pompeo Bertoni, Guido Reni, and Jean-Baptiste Breuers. on the right-hand side, there's two female figures, interspersed, conjoined with each other. On the left, it's two male figures conjoined with each other, and in the middle, there's the male and female figures become combined. So they join together, they make love in the middle whilst being watched by their separate selves. And the colour in the work was meant to convey a sense of the sea, of being not underwater, but being that notion of the sunlight hitting the water and it being a bright day, and that strange sense of reflection you get as the sunlight hits the water and then reflects up. Often when you're in a boat and you see the underside of the boat and realise that there's light coming from underneath, and you don't quite know where the surface of the sea is anymore, or what's solid and what's air. I wanted to create that sensibility with the colour in the works. The sense of creating an environment. I should point out that the works were made. We created a shell grotto in our house in Suffolk. We're quite close to the sea, and I've always loved the idea of grottos. They're damp spaces that fantasies occur in. And the idea of grotesque is something which is ugly, it's sort of awful, but it's also something which is fascinating and beautiful as well.
So the frames are lined with shells?
They are. When they go into the room in which they're made for, eventually, the entire room, including the ceiling, is all covered in shells. It's a shell grotto. And so these frames fit within the context of an awful lot more shells. But we couldn't do that when we were showing it outside of the shell grotto, so I created a wallpaper, which is something I'd always wanted to do. That idea of the decorative arts I've always loved, and when a wallpaper is a great wallpaper, I mean, somebody like William Morris, very different to this, but William Morris was such a great artist. I don't care whether it's wallpaper or not. He was so clever and so playful, and his use of colour is just genius. So the wallpaper is there to represent the undersea. It's dark, it's foreboding, and it represents the sort of the what happens on the bed of the sea, and when the sunlight is degraded by the water, and so you have the undersea, and then you have the paintings which represent above the water, or only just above the water. And so the idea that these paintings they're not grotesque, they're grotto-esque. They're paintings which are made to go in a grotto. So you have to understand the spelling is slightly different.
With another kind of very immersive installation that we experienced of your work was at the Freud Museum last year. And of course we all know the word psychology is actually derived from the Greek for a study of the soul. And we know also that Greek myth provided Freud with a vocabulary for a range of psychic states, such as narcissism, the Oedipus complex, or the idea of Eros and Thanatos as the twin drives of desire and death. And so this seemed to be an incredible, an inspired move on behalf of the Freud Museum to invite you to place your paintings and that of another artist called Matthew Weir in the context of his house in Hampstead. Could you tell us something about how you approached the installation of this show?
Initially we thought, we can take some paintings and put them in the existing paintings and put them in the space, and then you visit the space and really think about it and go, whoa, this is I don't think I've been in an environment which is quite so inducive to strange and creative thought. It's a very heavy space. You can almost feel, well, you can really feel Freud still there. You can almost smell his cigar smoke and see the stains that were created from his life there. Even though he was only there for a very short amount of time, he did practice in this room, and the whole room was set up as a piece of theatre in order to get the participant to talk. And it's a very odd sense of theatre because it's very leading. I mean, you're sort of leading the viewer into a particular way of thinking. Iwona was explaining the way in which Freud was very conscious of the theatrical environment of it, and how he saw the Greek, Roman and Egyptian heads and Asian heads that you see on the side as being like the Greek chorus. That they're, sorry, I'm stealing things that Iwona has told me, but they have no eyes, so they can't see you, but they can hear you. And they also can't speak, so they give no judgment of you, but they listen. And it's extraordinary that Freud understood that having an audience for somebody lying on the couch, which you just see on the side, allows you to open up. You are literally on a stage when you're lying on the magic carpet couch. And again, the colour of the room that he picked as well. He's got red curtains and green velvet on the chairs, and red and green are opposites. They're quite chromatic colours to put together. He was wanting to create an unsettling and uncanny space that was going to make you think about yourself. And to put art in that space is very difficult. So both Matthew and I ended up making most of the work very specifically for the space.
Really?
This painting,
Oh, sorry.
so the painting that's placed here and sort of magically hangs in front of the curtain is called Hellebore externi. It's a plant, it's a small hellebore flower, and it's where the colour of the painting came from little hellebore plants that we have in our garden, which are a very strange deep purple and bright green colour. They're quite grotesque looking little plants, the externi version of the hellebores. And again, I like that idea of the sort of grotesque nature of colour, and again the sort of heads, the two heads sort of playfully metamorphosizing from one figure into the other.
I was describing how there was a study made of Freud's rooms in Vienna, and just as it is here, he had a desk, a chair, and behind the desk a mirror, so that when you came for your consultation, the first thing you saw was yourself in the mirror behind him, and then he stood up to greet you. In other words, he blocked your image of yourself with his own image. And here, Glenn, you blocked our image of ourselves with your painting. So it's a fantastic kind of replication of that dynamic. There's a sculpture here which is placed in front of his bookshelves. And again, we've got this amazing metamorphic kind of Cupid figure with this incredible manifestation that's enveloping it. Tell us about the title, because we didn't have it here.
It's called The Endogenous Soul, the title of this book, of the sculpture. Endogenous is a word that means sort of self-reactive, something which doesn't need an external element to react. So it's a self-contained object in many ways, and it's that sense of having a soul which is enclosed, which is just doing battle with itself, as it were. And I wanted to describe a world in which the little girl, which is bronze and shiny and smooth and very figurative, is the same thing as the object that she's chastising. because in the original it's a 19th century bronze sculpture which I've applied paint to, brown oil paint, again with a brush. And she's chastising a little dog, but the dog is turned into this tree-like form, which is starting to envelop her. You can't quite see from here, but there's branches of the tree-like form which come round, and they're just about to start to grab her from behind. So it's rather funny, it's rather grotesque. The paint is quite shit-like in its colour, it has to be said, and is a wonderful contrast with the wonderful smooth bronze, which it's just about to do battle with, or whatever the relationship is between the two.
And here's something we haven't really talked about, is how these figures are often floating against a very dreamlike landscape. And looking at that, I think we are reminded of Salvador Dali or Tanguy in this particular painting. Can you say something about how you use these misty horizons?
This painting is called "We'll Keep On Dancing Till We Pay the Rent." It was called that because it was made for a show in New York, and it was just after lockdown, and the whole world seemed a little bit tragic at the time, I suppose. And it was that sense in which we, as artists, you have to keep on being entertaining no matter how you feel. You have to keep paying the rent, and you sort of have to keep producing. And Manhattan is a place where it's all about trying to be entertaining and entertain other artists and being competitive. So anyway, that's the title of the work. But this painting again, which took an awful long time, which was sort of me building up paint and deciding which of my imaginary brushstrokes appears and comes in front of which other brushstroke, and how on earth to create this solid sense of form out of this very out of a complete mess, basically, because once you overlay two drawings, you end up with something which is just this abstract mess, and you have to sort of build up and create form. The ear, which appears in the middle of it, which is very important, it's the centre, and the ear is shared by both heads in the figure, and it's listening to you very clearly. So they can't see the two heads, but they can hear you. They should be part of the Greek chorus downstairs. But we particularly wanted this painting on the staircase, by the way, because that sense of, as you see the painting from the bottom, you see one head, and as you walk up the stairs, you see another head. So that your perspective of the painting alters depending on how far away and which angle you're looking at it from. But the whole thing sits within this Dali-esque, Tanguy world. And I deliberately wanted to create this a background which you didn't quite know whether it was on Earth or not, whether it was a real place. And I ended up putting a small, you're not quite sure if it's a planet or a sun on the right-hand side of the figure in the landscape. That originally wasn't there, but it was a point again for your eye to bounce off. It's a compositional element as well as being a sort of having figurative meaning. Can I just point out that the yellow on the background of the figure is Indian yellow, and it's made from dried ox's urine. I particularly like that detail, really. The idea that you can make a painting out of ox's urine and black, which is bone black, so burnt bones and urine. Yes, wonderful. Isn't paint wonderful?
And then our final image, and that leads us to this idea about how we see your work. And I found a wonderful quote from a Dutch critic called Iwona Blazwick. And he says, there are many little eyes hidden in the paint. Sometimes they're intentionally meant as eyes, but they're often just little holes or colour accents that draw attention to the dense figuration, creating anchor points. While the exits are not clearly marked, there are points that offer themselves as entrances. So it's this idea of this image being also, it's not only looking out, making an almost cubistic idea of multiple perspectives of ways of seeing the world, but also of entry points for us as viewers seeing into it. So it's not just the nostrils and the eye sockets and the ear holes, but also the walls, the vortexes that you create with these swirly lines. And I just thought we could finish if you could say something about what you want us, the viewer, to see in this work. What can we define there?
I want you to understand that as humans we're not solids. We're made of atoms. We're continually changing. We're not permanent forms. We're turning from one thing to another. And so I like the idea of these figures. Again, I don't know who I am. I change from moment to moment. I don't really have a solid sense of ownership of any one personality. I think there's multiple me's inside this head, and that's kind of the way I feel. It's confused a lot of the time. It's trying to find the right word. It's struggling. It's struggling to make sense of itself, and it's struggling to make sense to other people. And so that's why there's all these thoughts flying around each other. There's a movement, late 19th century, early 20th century movement called Theosophy. And the first art book I ever had was a book on Theosophy that my uncle gave me. And Theosophy is an understanding that colour and form can be created out of thought, and that theosophic art is abstract art, a manifestation of pure thought that in pure colour can engage and become just like thought. If you put two colours together, and it's like putting two contrasting colours together is like putting two contrasting forms or thoughts together, and or two contrasting people. And again, you turn those colours into shapes, and they again are contrasting and animated. And that's what I'm trying to do, to create a theosophic human being, one that's continually moving and never quite still, almost like bebop. Hence the title. It's a name of a band from the 1970s, 80s, but it's the notion of bebop in that sense of that sense of rhythm and movement that you have within bebop. It's points of sound, and then slides of sound, and then continually playfully moving, so up, down, side to side, shaking, but it's keep you moving. Never quite stop with bebop.
And on that point, I would like to open it up to our audience here tonight. Thank you for staying with us despite the heat. And I wonder if anyone has any questions or comments.
I think one question over here. Hi, I was wondering, when you start the work, do you know the title and you work with it, or do you find the title once you finish?
I generally, the title comes to me part way through making the work, but then sometimes the title can change the work, and then sometimes the title that I thought was going to work doesn't work anymore. So it's sort of, titles can come and go during the process of making the work, but I love the idea that the title can change the painting in mid-process. That's quite important to me. It creates a subject in many ways, a slightly more solid idea than was the starting point that I had in my head for what the work was about. A title of a work, Duchamp said, was like adding an invisible colour. It's something which is not, you can't put in the painting other than in words. So it's a poetic, resonant form, which is an addition to the painting.
I think it'd be fair to say that you work within a tradition of the European mainstream from, let's say, the Renaissance through to the 19th century. You know, we go from Guido-Reni through to Delacroix. But you work with 20th century artists as a basis as well. But the ones that I've come across that you can work with sort of within the British tradition, say Albach, or particularly Austin Osman Spare, who I have no idea how you discovered him, don't fit to some. They seem to be they're anti-modernist painters in many ways. They don't fit the dominant tradition of the 20th century. Would you see that as a reasonable comment? Or?
I'm quite drawn to outsider artists, and Austin Osman Spare was an artist working in London at the turn of the 19th century, early 20th century, and he was a trained artist. He went to the Royal College of Art, but he was rather fascinated with outsider art and the occult. And I'm rather fascinated by outsider art and the occult in the collection in Marylebone. If you haven't been to the Brown collection, you should go, by the way, because it's just a few blocks away from here. We have an artist called Anne Churchill. She's still alive. She's partially blind now, but we have some beautiful, beautiful drawings by her in the collection, which are inspired by, when she was 14, she bought a small drawing from a flea market by Austin Osman Spare. And it's a drawing of Medusa, interestingly, and this Medusa tells her what to draw. It tells her how to make work. The spirit it's not Austin Osman Spare that's telling her, and it's not her unconscious mind. It's a spirit that comes from the Austin Osman Spare work, or from Medusa, that tells her how to paint. And I love that sense in which an external form, thought, spirit can tell you how to make work. Again, you no longer quite know who you are or where your inspiration comes from, and why shouldn't it be from a spiritual form? A lot of my work has a lot to do with religion, not just the Catholic religion, but a wider sense of what religion is, of what belief is. And I'd like to have a certain amount of respect towards, I certainly have a lot of respect towards Anne Churchill and Austin Osman Spare for their spiritual sensibilities within the world. But I kind of always feel like I'm an outsider artist, really. I always kind of feel like I want to go against the grain as much as possible.
Thank you very much. It was really enlightening to hear so much about the works and see recent work as well. When Iwona asked you what do you want us to see, you spoke about the human condition, starting from people. I wonder, obviously there are all these other layers, art historical ones, and within those the mythological ones. So say people who went to school in Greece would recognize or would be very familiar with the symbolism of the mythological figures. Art historians would recognize other references. How important are all these different layers of interpretation for you? When Iwona asked you, you spoke about the human condition and nothing of the references that the work can actually bring forward for other audiences.
I pile reference upon reference upon reference within my work, not just in the title, but within the work as well. I'm culling colour from one place, not culling, that's the wrong word, but I'm collecting colour from one place, form from another, composition from another, application of paint from somebody else, the way glaze is put on from another artist, the Delacroix red highlights. I'm cobbling together bits of all the other artists that I've ever seen, really. And sometimes I'm conscious of it, sometimes I'm not conscious of it at all. It's just my brain vaguely remembering certain things that I've seen. And as a viewer, you don't have to know any of it. You just have to look at it and enjoy it. And an important way for me to understand that was one of my harshest critics and one of the most intelligent person I had to look at my work and criticise it and be helpful was my father. He knew not a great deal about art history. I mean, he knew the sort of who Picasso and Matisse and Cézanne and those artists were, Rembrandt, whatever. But he didn't really spend much time in museums. He knew them via literary forms. He read an awful lot about them. But he certainly knew how to look at a painting. He certainly understood composition. He understood how colour was going to work. And because he was my father, he knew what I was trying to achieve in a painting. And he would sometimes go to me, I know what you're trying to do here and you haven't quite achieved it. And he was right. He knew how to get to the heart of what I was trying to do, because I suppose I was so similar to him. But he didn't need the vocabulary of being a trained artist in order to be very critical and understand composition and go, you've got too much yellow up here, you need to balance it with some yellow here or blue here. He could say all of that just because he was a thinking, articulate human being. Didn't need training to do it, and I hope that's what any viewer can bring to it. They just need to open themselves up and be articulate.
There are a couple of questions at the back, one here and one here.
Thank you. Do you listen to music when you work? And if so, how?
Oh, I mean, continuously. I mean, as you can see, my work, the titles refer to music. And I don't just listen to jazz. I mean, this is Bebop Deluxe, a band from, as I said, from the 1970s, sort of on the edge of a sort of electronic, jazz, rock, fusion. Very playful, very articulate, and listening to music, whether it's classical music, atonal music, modern dance music. I surround myself with all sorts of music, and that sense of rhythm and movement which music has, and the sense of composition which music has, how it changes through time, as a piece starts maybe quietly and then builds up, and then dies down again. It's all really important to the way you make a painting. You can steal ideas from music all the time. Even if it's just the sentiment, a piece of music can have softness in it. It can be red. A piece of music, you can have strange yellows in it, and so colour can come from music just as much as anything else can. So listening to music whilst I paint is extremely important.
Thank you for an absolutely fascinating talk. I didn't know your work, I have to admit. And I've learned a lot this evening. But I kind of know it because I see familiar things. I don't always know who the artist is. I don't mean you, but the artistic references, as it were, the ones that you've played with. And you used the word a few times, dream world, that you do in your painting or present in your painting. And I was also thinking about dream work and the way that you might take, I mean, you did also say just a little earlier now, cobbling, consciously cobbling together and putting it together. But I'm also thinking of how in a dream you've got you've got your daytime stuff, meaning the old masters, perhaps, or the 19th century, the real material that you've seen, and the artwork that you have seen, that then kind of inspires you. You create this, sort of condense it all into this work, painting, sculpture, whatever, and then we come, viewers, new and older ones, and see familiar things. It's very uncanny, not just because you use old masters, but because, well, I guess because you do use old mythological themes, etc. There's something very familiar and also very strange, and it's a fantastically unsettling and exciting feeling. So thank you.
Thank you. I kind of, sort of, in terms of sort of the idea of dream, in many ways one of the most sophisticated cultures that have existed in this planet was Aboriginal culture. and it's one of the most disrespected cultures, and one that's only clinging on to surviving. But a culture that can survive for thousands of years, unchanging, is a culture that really works. It's not doing battle with itself. It's not trying to change. It doesn't need to change. It gets as near perfection as you can. And we live in this world which feels it has to change all the time. And it feels it has to develop. New technology has to develop all the time. Why? Aboriginal culture didn't feel as if it needed to change because it understood its relationship to nature and the relationship to other people, and its own relationship to art, and how important art and the dream world was to the real world, and that the dream world could be every bit as important as the real world, and how you need to respect what your unconscious mind does, because it's something that we all share. I mean, we all dream, even if we don't remember our dreams. If we didn't dream, our brains just wouldn't work. And we spend such a lot of time dreaming that it's obviously the core of what makes us human, but we don't quite understand all of those processes going on because we're not conscious when it goes on, but it doesn't make it unimportant. Sorry, I'm getting on my high horse, but yeah.
That was great. There's a lot of fusion in your work. Different elements being fused together in unlikely relationships. Is it at some level an attempt at a reconciliation in a sort of sublimated way?
A reconciliation between...
Well, I don't know what it would be, but I think it's a bit glorious. I don't know what it would be. But it's because one of the principal subjects seems to be the pushing together of two unlikely forms. I don't have to illustrate it. I mean, you've done a really good job of illustrating that. But I just wondered whether, at some meta level, there is a meaning to that, which is really about, I suppose, it's really about trying to reconcile some kind of sublimated experiences.
Well, we all have trauma in our lives, even if they're not great, huge traumas. I mean, childhood and adolescence is one great big trauma. Even sort of, not being able to find the right T-shirt to wear becomes a huge trauma to a teenager, and it should be respected as such in many ways, because it's those traumas that build up our personalities. And obviously some people have to live with massive traumas in their life. It's coming from a dysfunctional family, and that is, tears them apart in many ways. But trauma is really important, and reconciliation again is even more important, because we're trying to say that it's okay, we didn't make sense, we didn't behave the right way in this particular scenario, we did the wrong thing, we said the wrong thing, we upset somebody, we all managed to do things that we are embarrassed about, but we have to carry on. And it's that sense in which you have to carry on in spite of all of the things that want to cripple you in the world, which I think possibly is at the heart of what I want to try to reconcile. But that's the same with everybody. We all want to try to survive, forget the traumas, and enjoy the things that give us pleasure. But those bloody traumas keep bubbling up underneath, and we can never try to get them away. It's like the voice in the back of our head which says you're a bad person. You're an awful artist. You can't paint. We try to ignore our unconscious thoughts and try to become conscious all the time. But it's a balance. We need both.
We're going to have just two more questions. One here at the front, and one at the back. Oh, sorry.
So Glenn, I just wanted to ask you, I think you partially answered my question actually with that last answer to Simon. But this idea of trauma, perhaps that's a priori to what I'm going to ask, perhaps it's post what I'm going to ask. But I'd just like to talk to you about, you became known for your works which copied modernist painting, modernist painters, British painters in particular, Albert, and you've gone back into looking at art history. So in a sense, this term fusion has been used to kind of where you bring different elements from different parts of the Western canon of art history together. But maybe you can tell us more about why you actually do that, because at the time you began to make your paintings, that term appropriation was around in the art world in the 1980s and 90s. And it seems to me that maybe you could tell us more about why you chose to mine art history in order to kind of make art to perhaps show us these feelings of traumas.
One of the events that really gelled what I wanted to do in terms of my work was seeing a photograph by Sherry Levine, and it was a photograph by Walker Evans of a relatively elderly couple in Midwest America. And the couple were looking directly back at you at Walker Evans and the camera, presumably, and they have very quite gnarled faces. I mean, the Midwest was a tough place at the time, and their faces are just deeply worn like the bark of a tree. But I wasn't looking at the Walker Evans, I was looking at a Sherry Levine. And there's a slight difference between the two. You can see the sort of grain of the picture, of the photograph, because she's taking a photograph of a photograph. And my brain just said, what the hell am I looking at? Am I looking at Sherry Levine? Am I looking at Walker Evans? Am I looking at the couple? What is the photograph anyway? What's reality? What's made up here? Has Sherry Levine altered the original photograph? Did Walker Evans alter the original photograph? Of course, there's no such thing as an original. It just sets this process going, and I thought, I love appropriation. I love the idea of not having ownership of the original image, of giving up the idea of being the genius which creates something original and going, oh, forget, I'm not a genius, but I can play around with what you're looking at, and I can create complex relationships that a viewer can have with looking at a work of art. And so I became rather obsessed, not with what my perspective was on what I thought my paintings were, but what the viewer's perspective was on looking at my painting. So when I make a painting, I'm less concerned with what I think of it, and I'm more concerned with what you think of it. And I spend my entire time in the studio trying to think what somebody else would think when looking at my work. I have a mirror in the studio, which I have to have a mirror when I paint, because it turns the work back to front, obviously, in it. And I take photographs of the work and look at it on my phone and see what it looks like that way. I most importantly ask other artists in the studio or other people in the studio and go, what do you see in the work? What do you think's wrong with it? And people tell me things. People say, oh, I like the iguana in that part of the painting. I go, what iguana? My God, there's an iguana there. I painted it and I didn't know. But I want to continuously understand what it's like to be a viewer looking at the paintings. And to that end, I love going to exhibitions. The National Gallery is a fantastic place to go to watch people looking at paintings and to try to see their eye movements and to see what they're actually looking at. I mean, I want to know when somebody looks at a Cézanne painting, are they thinking, oh, what a beautiful view, it reminds me of being in the south of France and looking at beautiful mountains and a beautiful tree, and isn't it peaceful and calm and lovely? Or are they actually looking at all the lines that interconnect under the back of it? Or are they thinking about colour and are they thinking about how Cézanne applied the paint? When, why has he put the paint on so thinly there? And what are these little daubs doing here? And there's so many different ways you can have looking at a painting. There's not just one way. And different people, well, I was going to say different people look at paintings in different ways, but the amazing thing is that people don't. people tend to look at paintings in the same way. A really good painting, the viewer will look at it in pretty much the same way as any other viewer. And it's that a really well-controlled painting tells you how to look at it. And that's what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to make an object which informs you how to look at it, what the process of viewing is, by creating paintings which are actually quite difficult to look at, because they're all this sheer flat surface, my paintings. So there's this ultimate problem is, am I looking at a Frank Auerbach painting or a Guido Reni painting, or am I looking at a Glenn Brown? I don't know, I don't care anymore. And so I want them to be problematic. I want them to repel and attract in equal measure.
Okay, one last question, and then we must go to the bar.
I think I'm more or less covered, but thank you so much. It was extremely insightful. Do you ever paint live models, or do you receive inspiration from the now, not the interpretation through the third person?
Life drawing has been very important to me as a student. When I did my foundation in Norwich School of Art, most of it was life drawing. In fact, before I went to art college, when I was still at school, I would go life drawing in Norwich School of Art as well. So my whole starting process of being an artist was working from the model and working from plaster casts as well. That was very important to me. We did a lot of drawings and pastel and charcoal and plaster casts. So that formal idea of using the model was very important. I tend not to anymore. All of the figures come from other paintings. I occasionally refer to photographs of real figures, or I even photograph myself in particular poses if I need to flesh in a hand or get it to get at the angle of a leg. Or I'll sometimes take a photograph of Edgar, in a particular pose, just to fill what a foot should look like, for instance, at a particular angle, with light hitting it in a particular way. But I think what's fantastic about life drawing, and it's one of the reasons we do life drawing classes at the Brown Collection, is that it gets people to look at what's in front of them, not what they think is in front of them, but what's actually in front of them. Because when you start to draw, you realise, oh, what I thought a human figure looked like isn't quite right. It's a fantastic skill to learn that what you expect to see isn't exactly what's in front of you. And I think all politicians should be made to do life drawing because it gets them to understand that people's perception of the world is not accurate. We manipulate things, we change history, we change what the activities that we've done. We describe things differently than how they actually are. And life drawing tells you, no, stop being so arrogant and look at what's in front of you.
On that very inspiring note, I think we should finish, but the exhibition Arrows of Desire is on at number 1 Royal Crescent and the Holborn Museum in Bath. Wonderful day out, I think. And it's on until January. I think, no, 4 months. Sorry? September 6th, apologies, September. So, it's a great and vital summer outing. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and thank you, Glenn, for an incredible